5 men vanish at sea. A boat disappears for nearly a decade. Then, thousands of miles away, a shocking discovery. When the Sarah Joe set sail off the coast of Hawaii, no one could have predicted the terrifying mystery that would unfold. A case so bizarre that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. Where were they for all those missing years? Who buried the body? And what happened to the rest of the crew? Born in 1952 in California's San Fernando Valley, Scott Moorman developed a fascination with the South Pacific at an early age. His obsession was fueled by a television series, Adventures in Paradise, which followed a crew of young sailors navigating the vast Pacific Ocean, taking on passengers and exploring unknown lands. For Scott, the idea of living in a tropical paradise became an enduring dream. More than anything, he longed to settle in Hawaii. However, life's responsibilities delayed his plans. He married young, had a son, and remained in California to support his family. But in 1975, his marriage ended, presenting him with an opportunity to finally chase the dream he had nurtured for years. While his former wife retained custody of their son, Scott took a leap of faith and relocated to the eastern coast of Maui, Hawaii, where he settled in a small community known as Nahiku. Nahiku in the 1970s was a melting pot of native Hawaiians, Vietnam War veterans seeking solace away from the mainland, and free-spirited individuals drawn to the island's bohemian charm. It was a place where work often took a backseat to leisure, and the community thrived on a laid-back, unconventional lifestyle. Unlike many outsiders who merely coexisted with locals, Scott was determined to integrate into the fabric of Hawaiian culture. He dedicated himself to learning Hawaiian Pidgin, the unique Creole language spoken by the locals, and immersed himself in their customs and traditions. Though never fully regarded as a true local, he earned the respect and friendship of many native Hawaiians, ultimately considering Nahiku his true home. Scott's love for his new life was unwavering. He only returned to California once, on the occasion of his son's birthday, where his family pleaded with him to stay. Yet, his heart remained tethered to Nahiku, and he was resolute in his decision to return. That flight back would be the last time his loved ones in California ever saw him. On February 11, 1979, Scott and 4 of his closest friends decided to forego their usual construction work for the day and embark on a fishing excursion instead. The weather was perfect, and they were eager to spend the day doing something they loved. Since none of them owned a boat, they borrowed a 17-foot Boston whaler, known as the Sarah Joe, from a friend. After stocking up on beer, snacks, and ice to store their anticipated catch, they set sail into the waters off Maui's east coast. At the time, Nahiku lacked television stations and reliable radio signals, making weather forecasts difficult to obtain. Local fishermen, accustomed to reading the skies, often relied on their instincts to determine whether conditions were safe. That morning, the ocean was calm, and by 10 a.m., as they entered the Alanui Channel, everything seemed fine. Unbeknownst to them, a low-pressure system was rapidly intensifying between 10 a.m. and noon. By the time they cleared the channel and reached open waters, a violent hurricane had begun to form. The storm was later described as one of the most devastating weather events Hawaii had seen in over 50 years. Of the 4 fishing boats that had ventured out from Maui that day, 3 made it back. The Sarah Joe did not. By 5 p.m., with no sign of Scott or his crew, concerned family and friends contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. Despite the gale-force winds and torrential rain, search planes and rescue boats were immediately deployed. However, the visibility was so poor that rescuers could barely see beyond 50 feet. Over the next 5 days, a massive search operation was launched, involving 44 planes and boats, covering an astonishing 56,000 square miles of ocean. Yet, not a single trace of the Sarah Joe or its crew was found. Refusing to accept defeat, the people of Nahiku pooled together $50,000 to fund private search teams, expanding the search radius even further. But after weeks of scouring the Pacific, no wreckage, debris, or personal belongings were discovered. The Sarah Joe had vanished without a trace. By the 1-year mark, the families of the missing men held a memorial service, concluding that the crew had tragically perished at sea. Approximately 2,300 miles southwest of Hawaii, in one of the most remote regions of the Pacific Ocean, lies the Tongi Atoll, a desolate collection of islands barely above sea level. This barren strip of land offers no fresh water, no vegetation, and virtually no human activity. The only recorded inhabitants in history were stranded Japanese soldiers during World War II. Due to its extreme isolation, Tongi Atoll was once considered a candidate for atomic bomb testing, a place so uninhabitable that even nuclear fallout wouldn't have mattered. On September 10, 1988, marine biologist John Norton, along with 4 other research crew members, arrived at the Tongi Atoll, an uninhabited, desolate island chain in the Marshall Islands. Their mission? To assess the region's viability as a wildlife sanctuary for seabirds and sea turtles. However, within just 30 minutes of stepping onto the remote shores, they encountered something deeply unsettling. Near the water's edge, partially buried in sand and battered by time, lay the skeletal remains of a small boat. The weathered hull had deteriorated, but the registration markings were still faintly visible. Norton, a longtime resident of Maui, immediately recognized the Hawaiian registration code, the letters HA emblazoned on the back. His heart pounded as he cleared away more sand, uncovering a sequence of letters. S-R-H-O-E. His mind raced to piece them together. Then it hit him. Sarah Joe. The very same boat that had mysteriously vanished 9 years earlier during a sudden hurricane off the coast of Maui. The revelation was chilling. Norton had not only been aware of the Sarah Joe's disappearance, he had actively led search efforts for the lost fisherman. And now, in an almost impossible twist of fate, he was standing face to face with the ghost of that tragedy, 2,300 miles away from Hawaii. The battered remains of the Sarah Joe offered no immediate clues. There were no signs of human life, no supplies, and no indication of what had become of its 5-man crew. Determined to find answers, Norton and his team began searching the island. If the missing fishermen had somehow washed ashore after the storm, perhaps their remains, or some trace of their survival, would still be there. Just 100 yards from the wreckage, Norton froze. In front of him stood a makeshift wooden cross, crudely constructed from driftwood. Beneath it, a pile of carefully arranged stones formed what appeared to be a gravesite. A wave of dread washed over him. Could this be one of the missing men? Calling over his crew, Norton carefully examined the site. They gently moved aside the stones, just enough to see what lay beneath. Inside the shallow grave, they found human bones. But that wasn't all. Resting beside the skeletal remains was a mysterious book, or rather, a stack of papers bound together. The pages were blank, except for one bizarre detail. Each sheet contained a carefully placed square of tinfoil. Nothing else. No notes, no inscriptions, just foil squares meticulously arranged across the pages. It made no sense. Someone had deliberately buried the body and left behind this strange artifact. But who and why? As Norton and his team examined the remains, one of his crew members made a chilling observation. The bones aren't fully bleached. When human bones are left exposed for years, they become sun-bleached, pale, brittle, and weathered. But these bones appeared relatively fresh, suggesting that the burial had happened recently. That meant Scott Mormon, one of the 5 lost fishermen, had died far later than anyone expected. But how late? And what had happened to him in the nearly decade-long gap since the Sarah Joe disappeared? The team immediately alerted the Coast Guard and Marshallese authorities, prompting a forensic investigation. Experts confirmed that the remains belonged to Scott Mormon. News of the discovery shook Hawaii. The families of the 4 other missing fishermen, desperate for answers, hired private investigators and a dive team to search every inch of Tongi Atoll. They scoured the shoreline, dug through the sand, and even searched the surrounding waters. They found nothing. The only additional discovery was the outboard motor of the Sarah Joe, found lodged in coral off the coast of the island. A few more bone fragments surfaced nearby, but forensic tests revealed that they, too, belonged to Scott Mormon. There was no trace of the 4 other men. There was no wreckage indicating where the Sarah Joe had been before washing up on Tongi Atoll. and there was no evidence explaining how Scott Mormon ended up buried in a proper grave, on an island that had been entirely uninhabited for decades. The most baffling twist came when investigators reviewed official records of Tangi Atoll. 6 years after the Sarah Joe vanished, the Marshall Islands government conducted a full survey of the atoll. Their team mapped the entire area, taking detailed measurements of the land. That was in 1985, 3 years before Norton's discovery. The records were clear. In 1985, there was no wrecked boat, no grave, no human remains, nothing. That meant Scott Mormon and the wreckage of the Sarah Joe had not been on Tangi Atoll at the time of the survey. But that shouldn't have been possible. Experts estimated that had the Sarah Joe drifted naturally after the storm, it would have taken just 3 months to reach Tangi Atoll, not 6 years. So where had the crew been all that time? And more disturbingly, who buried Scott Mormon? Even if Scott Mormon had somehow survived for 6 years, he would have been alone in a place with no fresh water, no food sources, and no human settlements. Yet someone took the time to bury him properly. Someone placed a cross at his grave, and someone left behind a book filled with tinfoil squares, an object with no known meaning, linked to no known culture. But who and where were the other 4 men? Did they survive the storm, only to meet an even more mysterious fate years later? Could they still be alive somewhere? To this day, no one knows the answers. The case of the Sarah Joe remains one of the greatest maritime mysteries in modern history, a puzzle with too many missing pieces and too many impossible coincidences. The Sarah Joe mystery is one of the most unsettling maritime disappearances in history. Even decades later, we still have more questions than answers. Did the crew survive only to meet a stranger fate years later? Was someone else involved? Or is the truth even more terrifying than we can imagine? What do you think happened? Let's talk in the comments. And if you love unsolved mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because there's always another mystery waiting to be uncovered.